Hey there friends, my name's Jim, and today I'd like to talk about Russia and China. If you've been living under a rock for the last month or so, you might not know that there's a lot of tension in Eastern Europe between Russia and Ukraine, which by extension somehow means the rest of Europe. At the same time, China's been militating against Taiwanese independence, letting them know that Hong Kong was basically successfully reabsorbed and Taiwan will face the same fate in short order. Well, these two nuclear superpowers decided to make a joint statement last week. While the rest of us were pissing and shitting about vaccine mandates and trucker convoys, they're actually moving forward with a global strategy to take on the West's hegemony. Unfortunately, too many live in a cold era mentality over here and will likely ignore this as two unimportant, less important global powers talking to each other. When more likely it signals how the rest of the world will act when our allies don't know whether or not we'll help them. And worse yet, when we're outgunned, what'll actually happen. So anyways, real quick to start with, I'd like to go through and highlight a couple of sections where this spells out exactly what they believe is the global future order of the world. So we're going to start with here, the joint statement of the Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China on the international relations entering a new era in the global sustainable development. Now, most of this, if you read it, is general gobbledygook, legalese gobbledygook, talking about how the countries will or want to work together and yada yada. But hidden in between these legalese and generally kind of boring statements, there are crumbs that tell you exactly what's going on. So this was February 4th. So, at the invitation of President of the People's Republic of China, Xi Jinping, President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir V. Putin, visited China on 4th February 2022. Heads of the state held talks in Beijing and took part in the opening ceremony of the Olympic Winter Games. The Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China, hereinafter referred to as the sides, state as follows. Today the world's going through the momentous changes, blah, blah, blah. So they're talking about the normal stuff. The advent of information society, cultural diversity, transformation of the global governance architecture, and the world order. There's an increasing interrelation and interdependence between the states. A trend has emerged towards redistribution of power in the world. All this kind of gobbledygook. But if we go down to this paragraph right here, you can read where they say, the sides believe that democracy is a means of citizens' participation in the government of their country with the view to improving the well-being of the population and implementing the principle of popular government. Democracy is exercised in all spheres of public life as part of a nationwide process and reflects the interests of all the people, its will, guarantees its rights, meets its needs, and protects its interests. There is no one-size-fits-all template to guide countries in establishing democracy. A nation can choose such forms and methods of implementing democracy that would best suit its particular state based on its social and political system, its historical background, traditions, and unique cultural characteristics. It is only up to the people of the country to decide whether their state is a democratic one. This is pointing out specifically to the rest of the world, as in not Russia and China, that whatever Russia and China choose to do is Russia and China's prerogative. That simply by dint of the U.S. saying that they need to be more democratic or they need to have their processes be more democracy-ridden, what he's saying here is you can't define democracy for them. They're their own people. If they feel good about their system, they like their system, they're self-organizing and creating these systems, then nobody else can say that's not democracy. We need to come in and fix that, which is the entire problem going on in Taiwan and kind of Ukraine, but let's move on. So, The sides note that democratic principles are implemented at the global level, as well as in the administration of state. Certain states' attempts to impose their own democratic standards on other countries, to monopolize the right to assess the level of compliance with democratic criteria, to draw dividing lines based on the grounds of ideology, including by establishing exclusive blocs and alliances of convenience, that's specifically referencing things like NATO, prove to be nothing but flouting of democracy and go against the spirit and true values of democracy. Such attempts at hegemony pose serious threats to global and regional peace and stability and undermine the stability of the world order. Again, translating that a bit, that's them saying, don't tell us what democracy is, because when you come in and try to fight for that, we will fight back. So if we continue to scroll down to 3, the sides are gravely concerned about serious international security challenges and believe that the fates of all nations are interconnected. No state can or should ensure its own security separately from the security of the rest of the world at the expense of the security of other states. The international community should actively engage in global governance to ensure universal, comprehensive, individual, and lasting security. Now, that's just more of a statement that's made by every country about how we need to continually, tie our different systems together to make one big global governance. which is more of what you expect. However, this next sentence kind of reaffirms. The sides reaffirm their strong mutual support for the protection of their core interests, state sovereignty and territorial integrity, and oppose interference by external forces in their internal affairs. Now, specifically, this relates to both Taiwan and Ukraine again. Russia considers the things that are going on within Ukraine to be part of its sphere of influence and something that external forces should not be interfering in. In Taiwan and China, obviously, that is considered its internal affairs, and if we were to defend Taiwan in any way, it would necessarily affect their territorial integrity, which this is saying Russia, in that case, would come to defend. Russia and China stand against attempts by external forces to undermine security and stability in their common adjacent regions, intend to counter interference by outside forces in the internal affairs of sovereign countries under any pretext, oppose color revolutions, and will increase cooperation in the aforementioned areas. So this again is Putin and Xi saying that if there were to be a sudden rise in like Ukrainian independence, what they would say is that is a color revolution organized by the United States. That's not actually what the people want. It's what the CIA wants the people to think the people want. That gives them a pretext to basically do whatever they want to their citizens, regardless of what happens, because they can just call any kind of revolution a color revolution started by the CIA, which, to be honest, most of them are. So the next important thing would be this. The sides believe that certain states, military and political alliances, and coalitions seek to obtain, directly or indirectly, unilateral military advantages to the detriment of the security of others, including by employing unfair competition practices, intensify geopolitical rivalry, fuel antagonism and confrontation, and seriously undermine the international security order and global strategic stability. The sides oppose further enlargement of NATO and call on the North Atlantic Alliance to abandon its ideologized Cold War approaches, to respect the sovereignty, security, and interests of other countries, the diversity of their civilizational, cultural, and historical backgrounds, and to exercise a fair and objective attitude towards the peaceful development of other states. So more of this, more of NATO bad, get rid of NATO, China's got our back on this one. Basically, this whole statement is just, if you were to attack Ukraine, China's got us, and if China were to take back Taiwan, and you were to try to interfere in their state sovereignty, the respect to sovereignty, security, and interests of other countries, well, then Russia would have their back. It's a pretty clear statement. And when people say things like, people think Russia and China are so buddy-buddy, but really at their core they have competing interests in places like the Arctic and even in places in between their own borders. That may be true. But statements like this are hard to ignore when they're specifically saying the things that the U.S. is doing in Ukraine is leading to war, and the things that China will probably do in Taiwan will lead to war if you don't respect our sovereignty. And of course, the Russian army reaffirms its support for the One China principle, confirms that Taiwan is an inalienable part of China, and opposes any form of independence of Taiwan. Pretty basic language there. And then a little bit further down, the sides are seriously concerned about the trilateral security partnership between Australia, the United States, and the United Kingdom, AUKUS, which, again, if you hadn't been paying attention, earlier this year we got in a new agreement between the Australia and the United Kingdom with which we would exchange nuclear submarine technology, which provides for deeper cooperation between its members in areas involving strategic stability, in particular the decision to initiate cooperation in the field of nuclear-powered submarines. Russia and China believe that such actions are contrary to the objectives of security and sustainable development of the Asia-Pacific region, increase the danger of an arms race in the region, and pose serious risks of nuclear proliferation. The sides strongly condemn such moves and call on AUKUS participants to fulfill their nuclear and missile non-proliferation commitments in good faith and work together to safeguard the peace, stability, and development in the region. And again, it goes on to talk more. I personally suggest you read this entire document, all of it, because it goes on like this, where it says, you mess with Russia's independence and sovereignty, China will stomp you. Mess with China's independence and sovereignty, Russia will stomp you. It's basically the anti-NATO agreement. And after what happened in Afghanistan, I would probably argue that their military, collection of individuals is going to be significantly more powerful than ours. But that's just my opinion. So after seeing that, I would like you to. So after that, President Macron went down to Russia because this was such an important notice that they put out, because he was attempting to, President Macron is the Prime Minister of France. He was attempting to, who's married to his former elementary school teacher who's like 30 years older than him, which is weird. But anyways, he went over to Russia to try and convince Putin to settle the tensions in Ukraine, which is funny because I mean, I personally think it may be our side that's doing the more attention pushing, but let's just take a little look at that video, and I just want you guys to get an idea of where Putin is coming from. Think of it from his point of view. Ukraine's right next to him. That's always been in their sphere of influence. That's like Cuba is to the United States. It's not the part of the United States, but it's definitely in our sphere of influence. I mean, when Russia came and put all its missiles on Cuba, we called it the Cuban Missile Crisis. So if we look at this from the Russians' point of view, this would be the Ukrainian Missile Crisis. So just want to take a quick look at what he had to say following the statement. Well, this is February 9th, following Macron asking him to please stop whatever national security.
Я хочу еще раз все-таки подчеркнуть это. Я говорил, но мне очень бы хотелось, чтобы вы меня услышали все-таки в конце концов. И донесли это до своих читателей, зрителей и пользователей в интернете. Но вы понимаете или нет, что если Украина будет в НАТО и военным путем будет возвращать себе Крым, европейские страны автоматически будут втянуты в военный конфликт с Россией. Конечно, значит, потенциал объединенной организации НАТО и России несопоставим. Мы понимаем. Но мы также и понимаем, что Россия одна из ведущих ядерных держав. По некоторым компонентам, по современности даже многих опережает. Победителей не будет. И вы окажетесь втянутыми в этот конфликт помимо своей воли. И вы даже не успеете глазом моргнуть, когда будете исполнять пункт 5 Римского договора. Господин президент, конечно, не хочет этого развития. И я не хочу. И я не хочу. Поэтому он здесь и находится, и мучает меня уже 6 часов подряд.
Yeah, they pick for radios. So, pretty strong statement. Basically what he's saying is if you were to put Ukraine into NATO, and NATO were to try to take back Crimea from Russia, which Russia considers Russian territory, Ukraine considers Ukrainian territory, it's all kind of mixed up there because of the fall of the USSR. That were to happen, and they were trying to take back to Crimea, Russia would resist, and then war would automatically break out because of Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty. We would automatically be at war with Russia. Well, Europe would automatically be at war with Russia, who he is obviously trying to talk to, because at this point Joe Biden is breaking down. It's completely insane. The things that Joe Biden is saying, specifically in order to try and, I assume, lower the temperature in this, is doing nothing but massively accelerating things. And I can give you an example in just 1 second. So I'd like to take you over to a tweet by townhall.com. So this is now, remembering everything that we just said about how significant keeping state sovereignty and state ability to do what they want and not be influenced by other countries, specifically the United States and Western Europe, in mind, keeping in mind how important that was as the entire premise of that whole statement that they made. Let's see how Biden talks about what Nord Stream 2, which is an agreement, which is the idea is Russia, and it's a oil pipeline that's going to be between Russia and Germany. They're going to be able to share oil between Russia and Germany, and he's saying, no, this ain't going to happen. So let's see exactly how he covers this, remembering how important state sovereignty is to these groups, or to these massive countries, massive nuclear powers. So.
Let me answer the first question first. If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
How will you do that exactly, since the project and control of the project is within Germany's control?
We will, I promise you, we'll be able to do it.
Now, to me, that sounds like a bit of a threat. That sounds like if Germany continues to act with deference to Russia in this case, then we're going to do something nebulous to stop them, which seems to me like us involving ourselves in those states' sovereignty. And that's exactly what China and Russia were arguing against. This is the direct effect that will lead to war, especially people's massive amounts of ego while this goes on. And just to put a little cherry on top, this is the U.S. mission to OSCE, which is the official Twitter account of the U.S. mission to Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Security and cooperation. There is simply no defensive justification for Russia to amass so many forces in such a short time on Ukraine's borders. None. Ukraine poses no threat to Russia, nor does NATO, nor for that matter does the United States. Now, with this in mind, imagine just for a second, I just want you to think about, like, if you don't even have to imagine it. In the Cold War, the Cuban Missile Crisis was when Russia put their missiles in Cuba, in a country that was allies with Russia, but in the sphere of influence of the United States. We consider this a massive, massive no-no and almost blew up the entire Earth to stop it. Did the Bay of Pigs, that whole massacre, a bunch of nonsense. Now, if it was back then, Russia would be saying, you know, there's simply no defensive justification for the U.S. to amass so many forces in such a short time on Cuba's borders. None. Cuba poses no threat to America, nor does, I don't know, whatever. You know, I'm just trying to make the similarity obvious here. So, my personal belief, and I'll make this more clear in a future video, but just for the sake of getting it out here before war starts, I want to point it out. This is what I think is going to happen. The Winter Olympics are going on in Beijing right now. Now, they're not going particularly well, but this does give China is a very big honor society. Within that, they will try their best to make themselves look good upon the stage that is the Olympics. After that, all bets are off. Specifically with this joint statement between them and Russia. People have been saying Russia will invade Ukraine for weeks and weeks and weeks. Why hasn't Russia invaded yet? Well, part of the reason is that our intelligence is garbage and they're just kind of making this stuff up. But regardless, it seems like a conflict is going to happen, and it would behoove Russia to get it over with sooner rather than later, in my opinion, except for a couple things like the ground being still a little muddy, but it's been frozen for months now. So, in my opinion, I think what's happening is Russia and China have gotten together and made a little agreement. Russia will wait until post the Beijing Olympics, when all the other countries have gone home from China. They invade Ukraine. Biden comes out making all this fuss and bluster and blurry, give it a couple of days, and while we're all pointed directly at Russia, looking at them saying, this is horrible, this is a massive, thing, and China's got their back, boom, China goes into Taiwan. We're split among two fronts. We've got two different wars going if we actually want to defend either of these nations, but it'll be completely militarily impossible for us because we couldn't even evacuate Afghanistan and get the military out before the civilians got out. Anyways, guys, act accordingly. Please like, share, subscribe. Go into the description box below. Feel free to support me if you'd like with the support links below, and hopefully by the time I put on my next video, we're not at war yet. Peace.